I want to talk a little bit about a very, very specific type of change event. Dr. Bruce Tuckman in 1965 published a model called Tuckman's Group Dynamics Principle. And many of you are familiar with that. Many of you have seen that, and certainly those of you that we've worked with have seen that in various kinds of training programs that we've introduced and talked about that. But I want to talk about just a piece of that as it relates to change dynamics. Dr. Tuckman identified 4 stages in team and group development, and those stages were forming, storming, norming, and performing. Dr. Tuckman identified a very linear path between those 4 stages where a team would literally move from forming into storming, into norming, into performing. And he clearly identified and articulated, as several scientists have later, what some of the key elements of each of those steps are. You know, during forming, you're gathering together resources, you're connecting processes, you're really building your team and your group. During storming, there tends to be a high level of energy associated with the mission, and you're starting to get some things narrowed and certain relationships are being built. During norming, a comfort is developed that we certainly get into a routine, and then into performing, it hits the highest level of performance available to a group dynamic and all of the ingredients associated. Now, how this relates to change is a really, really important leadership piece as well. What happens, and you know, when I ask a group if you would identify where your team is at in that group, the most common response I get is, you know, somewhere between norming and performing, or somewhere between storming and norming. So if your team is somewhere on that dynamic, maybe down in norming and kind of pushing a little bit towards performing, what happens when we take a key team member out of that mix? So you've gone through all those stages, and there's been various angst and stuff associated with that, and you know, processes that you've engaged and built in there. But now you take a key team member out. What now? Well, the answer to that and how it relates to change management and change dynamics is literally when you take a member out and replace that member, add a new person, literally what you have to do is go back and reform. Reform, move to storming, move to norming, and then hopefully migrate towards performing. Now, I know a lot of folks bristle at that and say, well, why do we have to start over? Well, the reason you have to start over is if you don't start over, you risk alienating or losing that new team member and not making them fully connected into the dynamics of the group. Does that mean it's going to take you another 2 years to get to the norming stage? Absolutely not. It's not going to take that long, because you as the leader can guide it through those stages a lot quicker than you did initially. So here's a couple of things I'd like you to think about. If you add a new team member or a team member is removed, please take a little bit of time, go back, reform, move quickly into storming or storming again, into that norming mode, and then pushing into that performing piece. If you don't, and if you ignore that particular change dynamic, again, you're going to risk not having all of the pieces working at the maximum efficiency, and in fact, maybe even having some of the pieces working against each other in that team dynamic.